Welcome back to the show today. I want to share some thoughts with you on how to keep it safe. I know it could mean a bunch of different things, but you'll see where I'm going here in a few minutes. Yogi Berra, there's a story about him that a guy named J.M. Boyce wrote some years back. He said there's a story involving Yogi Berra, the well-known baseball player for the New York Yankees, and Hank Aaron, who at the time was the chief power hitter for the Milwaukee Braves. He said the teams were playing in the World Series, and as usual, Yogi was keeping up his ceaseless chatter, intended to pep up his teammates on the other hand and distract the Milwaukee batters on the other. As Hank Aaron, came to the plate, Yogi tried to distract him by saying, "Henry, you're holding the bat wrong. You're supposed to hold it so you can read the trademark." Aaron didn't say anything, but when the next pitch came, he hit it into the left field bleachers. After rounding the bases and tagged up at home plate, Aaron looked at Yogi Berra and said, "I didn't come here to read." There's probably a few different storylines that we could go down in that example, but there are some people that don't want you to succeed. I know that might be shocking to some of us, but yeah, there's a few, not many, but there's a handful of people that don't want you to succeed. They want to distract you from doing the things that you know that it takes in order to get where you're trying to get to. C.S. Lewis writes in the book called The Weight of Glory, "If we let ourselves, listen, we shall always be waiting for some distraction or other to end before we can really get down to our work. The only people who achieve much are those who want knowledge so badly," he says, "that they seek it while the conditions are unfavorable. Favorable conditions never come." Now, again, let me just think about that a minute. Some of us wait for the perfect situation to come before we get started. We wait for the perfect opportunity or the perfect people or the perfect situation to happen. Everything, all the stars align and the planets align before we get started, instead of getting started before any of that happens. I know you've struggled with it, and I know for a fact I've struggled with it, that we wait for everything to go right before we take steps forward, when you know what, that's not really how it works. Joyce Meyer talked about that in her book, The Battlefield for the Mind, when our mind literally is the place where everything starts and stops. Literally. Because if you truly want to do the extraordinary, then in your own mind, you have to see it happening before it can ever happen. I mean, anybody who's built a building or had somebody build a building, it all starts with the blueprints. Even before that, it starts with the idea. It starts with a thought. And then it gets put on paper, which there's a lesson there too. You put it on paper, and then you're able to build it. When we built our house, my wife said she wanted this and this and this. The people put it on paper, on a blueprint. Then the builders were able to build what was on the blueprint. But it first starts here, and then you put it on paper. And then, if you do it consistently enough, what you have on paper will eventually, in time, turn out to be something extraordinary. And you see that through the Bible many times. There's story after story. I don't know, I didn't count. Probably dozens of stories of people who have achieved the extraordinary even when times were not the best situation at all at the time. In fact, there's a story I remember reading in the Old Testament about this young shepherd guy. He may have been a teenager, early 20s, that he wasn't trained to be a warrior at all. In fact, he was trained to take care of his dad's sheep. And in that situation, it was like a lot of farmland. So that was his job. His number one job was take care of dad's sheep. Don't let the wolves and the lions take the sheep. So this guy David is his name. He saw an opportunity to step up, and because nobody else was stepping up, he saw an opportunity to leverage. Listen, he leveraged what he knew and what he mastered, taking care of his dad's sheep, for something greater. Now, again, there's lessons in here for you. That is, what if you leverage what you've learned over the years for something that you've never done, but the principles still apply? whether it's in this example with David, the principles of taking care of his dad's sheep from evil animals. I'm not getting into the whole backstory, it'd take too long. But if you know the backstory about it, then he just leveraged what he knew, what he perfected, his skill sets, in order to do something extraordinary, which up until that time, it seemed, the people that were standing around doing nothing, whining and complaining and being fearful, hadn't even thought about that, haven't thought about leveraging the people with certain skill sets. You have skill sets that you may not have categorized yet that can be leveraged to do some things that you have not been able to maybe see yourself doing before. So what I'm saying is stuff you've been through, journeys you've been through, difficulties you've been through, lessons you've learned, people that you've hung around, mentors that you've had in your life, they've planted seeds in your life that you can use to do stuff that can be substantially extraordinary if you want it to. And you know what? In my world, those lessons are valuable. Think about that a minute. So what David did was he leveraged what he knew. In fact, it was to the T. He leveraged everything that he knew in order to, eventually that led him, so again, a really long story, it leveraged him to become king of Israel back then because he didn't allow what he knew to lay dormant. Think about that a minute. How many times haven't you lay dormant, D-O-R-M-A-N-T, dormant, things that you know that have worked in the past because maybe you don't think that they are applicable today, when in fact they're very applicable to today. You just got to change the form just a little bit or change the situation, but the principle is still exactly the same. So you and I have to think about that a lot. In fact, there's again, certain contexts and stories in Scripture where a guy comes to mind by the name of Peter. And Peter, in the New Testament, by the way, who was a follower of Christ, a disciple of Christ, a student of Christ. In fact, the Greek calls them the disciples learners. They were learners in that culture. And Peter was very opinionated, very hot-headed. His way was the only way, and he was absolutely right in his own eyes. And when he was challenged to do something that was extraordinary, he found out pretty quickly that he didn't know what he thought he knew. I wonder how many people you know, maybe in your workplace or your own family, who think they know, but they really don't know what they think they know. So what Peter did eventually was he realized through falling on his face that he now realized that he knew that he didn't know. Well, think about that a second. There's people who don't know that they don't know. In fact, a lot of people in your life don't know that they don't know. But once the few, and again, it's just a fraction of the people that you know and I know, that once they realize that they know that they don't know, there's the potential for growth. There's a potential for maturity. There's a potential for opportunity. But until you and I know that we don't know, we can't grow. Because when we think we have all the answers and we really have no answers, then we're only fooling ourselves. We can't move forward. Michael Hyatt, a great author, he was a publisher of a publishing firm for many, many years. He said he shares some ways to keep moving forward when you hit a brick wall in your own personal growth. And I think you've dealt with it, I know I've dealt with it, where we come through this wall and we're like, I can't or won't take another step forward. He says, number one, screen for excuses. Screen for excuses. He says, be honest with yourself. It's easy to slip into an excuse. Listen, it's easy to slip in an excuse disguised as an immovable barrier. To be safe, assume all walls are excuses until proven otherwise. Like Neo of Matrix fame, sometimes your best answer will be, quote, there is no wall. Again, I say it a lot on the show, but there's a lot of people, the majority of people who've reached any level of success have to play, to this day, mind games with themselves. If not, they're going to fall into that same apathetic mode of thought where they don't want to get up out of bed and do the hard work and pay the price. He says, number two, question the walls. This is Michael Hyatt's words. Question the walls. You could try talking to them, I suppose, but that but that could lead to other problems. Think about the barriers themselves, he says. Are the walls that you've created yourself or allowed to be created in your silence? Are you missing the skill sets to get over the walls? Where can you get a reliable third-party perspective on the barriers you face? Don't rule this out. The walls may be telling you it's time to grow elsewhere. Think about it. He says in number 3, he says, get creative. As Thomas Edison famously said, there's always another way. If you find a real barrier does exist, start by figuring out your goal. Let your imagination work backwards to see if other solutions present themselves. He says, number 4, again, Michael Hyatt's words, take baby steps. If you find you can move forward where you are, don't hesitate to start small. Don't hesitate to start small, he says, but do start. As Michael Hyatt said, again, he's quoting his own words, motion leads to momentum. Again, motion leads to momentum. Maybe you can't do it all right the first time, but you can do something. Sit down, jot down a plan, take steps, even small ones in the right direction, but you have to start now. Because if you and I maybe struggle with this too, we're going to put it off. We're going to procrastinate. I'll get to it tomorrow. Most days I have to grab myself by the collar to do stuff today. If not, my temperament is to do it tomorrow. I'll go to the gym tomorrow. I'll clean this mess up tomorrow. I'll make the calls tomorrow. I'll do this tomorrow. And tomorrow is then postponed till the next day and the next day. And guess what? I look back a month later and I still haven't gotten done stuff that I should have gotten done a month ago. I think you probably do the same thing at least some of the time. Number 5, he says, these 3 words were from my life leader's Walt Disney Sum It Up. William H. Murray added this wisdom that I found true again and again. The moment one definitely commits oneself, all sorts of things occur to help one that would have never otherwise occurred. Unlike the rides of Disney World, we should always refuse to come to a complete stop. Think about that in your own life. Have you ever experienced situations where once you started undertaking a certain project that things really magically just happened for your favor, for your benefit? It wasn't just magically, it's because you started taking the steps, and it's like being on a boat with a sail going. Once you take the sail down, the boat still goes because of momentum. There's power in momentum. You just got to keep your foot on the gasoline, on the gas pedal, in order to maintain the momentum in your own life. Jennifer Jones shares, quote, it's interesting what comes to you when you think you can't go on. I used to work with a pastor who loved to quote Walt Disney. As I sloshed through the woods out of breath and out of strength, his words began to echo in my mind. So I did. Sometimes I ran. Sometimes I walked, with the rain getting heavier. I willed myself to not quit. Even when the last mile was nothing but hills, I kept going. That's what it's all about, right? When you can't see your way, when things get unexpectedly difficult, when your cheerleaders have all gone home, when you think you can't stand another minute, you have to keep going because you can't do anything else. Certain storms in life don't give you an option to quit. You don't get an umbrella. There's no shortcut. You just have to tough it out. Whether you lose or win, there's a reward pressing through to the end, they said. You will gain endurance. It is quite possibly the best character trait you can ever have. Endurance is knowing you can withstand anything and acting accordingly. It's the ability to look at the toughest trial and say to it, quote, I can outlast you. I can outlast you. And it only comes when you don't quit. I can outlast you. So keep moving forward. If no one else is cheering you on, I am. Remember that there's a prize on the other end of the finish line, and it's worth way more than any medal or a t-shirt. Let me put it to you this way. Most people don't finish what they start. Think about that a second. Most people don't finish what they start. How many people have started classes, have started college, have started a job, have started a career, have started to do certain things in relationships, and they never saw it to the end? They quit in the first quarter or the second quarter or just before the end of the game. They quit. They gave up. They went home. You're never going to achieve anything great unless you keep going forward. Over in the Old Testament, in the book of Job, it says certain people, they keep moving forward, and those with clean hands become stronger and stronger. That's just not easy, I'm telling you. In fact, the great evangelist Billy Graham, he put it so well. He says, when I was 7 years old, my father bought me my first bicycle. I've never ridden one before until then. Patiently, my family and friends tried to teach me the art of cycling. I soon found out that there was one thing I must do. If I was to stay on the bicycle, was to keep moving it forward. If I ceased to go forward, I would fall and hurt myself. We can never live this life on the highest plane unless you're continually growing and moving forward. And I think you've experienced it. Once you maybe stop the bike, you fall over, right? As long as you keep pedaling, you move forward most of the time. A guy named Jeffrey Gitomer, Gittomer, he's like a sales teacher. He teaches salespeople around the United States. He says one of the things that are consistent with him is that inconsistency leads to complacency. Inconsistency leads to complacency, and that's probably a big word. But when you're not consistent in doing the small things, then it gets easier not to do anything at all. Think about that a minute. When you neglect the habits that will get you where you need to get in life, then apathy sets in. When apathy sets in, you just sit back and then you, for the lack of a better term here today, you just veg, you just rot from the inside out. You emotionally gain weight. You have a lot of baggage that if you would have kept moving and kept pedaling, you would have been much farther ahead, but you quit. There's a story. It says, Trevor, when you packed my things, where did you put my weights? These were the words that Nelson Mandela asked Trevor Manuel a day after he had been released from jail after 27 years. Your weights? Trevor asked. Yes, my weights. I gym every morning. I need my weights. Mandela responded matter-of-factly. This was in a telephone call at 5 o'clock in the morning. It sounds rather surprising for someone who had spent 27 years in jail to worry about weights just a day after tasting freedom. However, this was the hallmark of Nelson Mandela. It's called consistency. And I think that model applies to your life, and it hopefully will apply to my life one of these days, that consistency gets you through some of the most challenging times. Yeah, talking to me today, and hopefully to you. Consistency gets you through the most challenging times. Consistency is the ability really to maintain some sort of a particular standard without any variation at all. I can remember when my piano teacher was teaching me to play piano when I was probably, 12, 13 years old. And I just wanted to do a certain thing in a certain way. I'm not going to get into how to play the piano. But she made me do some stuff on the piano that in time made it easier to play the piano. But at the time, I was very choppy with it. I was very inconsistent with it. I was not very good at it. And now what she was teaching me is all I do as far as playing the piano goes. I use that technique to save time and make things much more fluid when I play the piano. So what I'm saying is, when you do stuff for the first several times, it's difficult. Once you do it enough times, it becomes a habit, and then it becomes comfortable that you can't imagine not doing it. But you have to get through that hard stuff several times, many times, before what you're trying to get good at, you get good at, and makes it a whole lot easier in your own life. Consistency produces patterns. And patterns literally change the world in so many different ways. E. Stanley Jones talked about this. He says, some people go through life getting results, and others get consequences. In other words, if you aren't focused, your energy is dissipated and your consequences occur by default. He says if one of your goals is to protect yourself in order to reach for bigger and better things, you can't do it alone. Consistency is so important in everything you do. My son Tim, he's a magician, and he can't just imagine himself being a magician. He just can't want himself to be a magician. He can't just, read the books and watch the videos to be a magician. What does he have to do? He has to practice over and over, hours and hours and hours a day, until now he's doing shows sometimes on his own. Well, consistency produces results. So if you and I are not determined to be consistent, then guess what we can't expect? We can't expect results. You can't expect results if you choose not to be consistent. If I choose not to be consistent, I cannot expect results. It goes into every area of our lives, from relationships to business. Sales is a great example. If you're not consistent on the front end with the activity that you need to do, you're not going to get what you need to do, at the end. You have to do it on the front end in order to get what you need to do at the back end. Moses, we talked about Moses on these shows multiple times, and that his job one day was to just keep his hand where it needed to be. I'm not getting into the backstory of it all. But he had to make a choice not to let go. So he decided there were two guys, a guy named Aaron and a guy named Hur, H-U-R. That's how he spelled his name. Aaron and Hur decided that if Moses' job was to do a certain thing, that they decided to help Moses do what he had to do. So Aaron and Hur came alongside him to help him do what he had to do. Now think about that in your own life. The smartest people on the planet have Aaron and Hurs. They do. Maybe they're behind the scenes. In fact, I would say most of them are behind the scenes in every area of life, whether they're politicians, whether they're celebrities, whether they're chefs, whether they're school teachers. They have Aaron and Hurs in their life to help them keep going in the most tiring, difficult, stressful times. So if it works for them, maybe you and I should have the Aaron and Hurs also in order to be consistent in our own lives. Tim Hansel writes a book. He says, there's a wonderful story about Jimmy Durante, one of the great entertainers of a generation ago. He was asked to be part of a show for World War II veterans. He told them his schedule was very busy and he could only afford a little bit of time. But if they wouldn't mind him doing one short monologue and immediately leaving to the next appointment, he would certainly come over and do it. But when Jimmy got on stage, something interestingly happened. He went through the short monologue and then stayed. The applause grew louder and louder, and he kept staying. Pretty soon, he had been on 15, 20, then 30 minutes. Finally, he took a last bow and left the stage. Backstage, someone stopped him and said, "I thought you had only a few minutes. What happened?" Jimmy answered, "I did have to go, but I can show you the reason I stayed. You can see for yourself if you look down on the front row. In the front row were two men, each of whom had lost an arm in the war. One had lost his right arm and the other had lost his left arm. Together, listen, together they were able to clap. And that's exactly what they were doing, loudly and cheerfully." Sometimes when you and I look at other people that have gone through some really crappy stuff in their life, if you look at it a certain way, that should give you and I a little inspiration to stop whining about the stuff that we're whining about. I mean, really? I mean, we whine about stuff that really doesn't matter, when if you open your eyes enough to look at people around you, have a reason to complain and don't complain. Don't get me started on that. Because they have a legitimate reason to gripe about what they're going through, and they choose not to. They choose to smile and keep moving forward. And I gripe about the most stupid thing. I gripe about the traffic and the car acting up and this and that. You do the same thing. How dare we? How dare we allow our complaints to stop our consistency? You and I have the opportunity to be consistent if we surround ourselves with people that hold us accountable. You have to have people, let me say it a different way. You have to place people in your life that will hold you accountable. Yeah. And those people must have integrity. They have to have integrity. That is the first characteristic of those people. If you even sense or even see an example that they're in it for them, time to walk away. If they lie, if they cheat, if they shade half-truths or tell half-truths, they're not the kind of people that you want on your team. You have to find people with integrity and honor, and those people can help you become more consistent. And even more importantly, then you need to find people that you can help be consistent. You can find people that you then are going to hold them accountable as you have people in your life that will hold you accountable. So as I close the show today, you know what? You can do more things in your life than you can possibly imagine, but you have to keep certain things safe. You have to keep the goal of being consistent very close to your heart and create a life that only you can create, and design systems and places that will help you get where you really want to be in a much faster way than you ever thought possible. Hope some ideas here helped you today, and I hope that these shows inspire you to keep moving forward in your own life. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back real soon.